Welcome to another edition of the Sourcing Exchange. And today, as always, I'm very excited with today's guest, Liza Amlani, who I'm fascinated by because you seem to wear many hats. I know you're a passionate fashion professional in the retail sector and with fashion brands.
Yes.
Yes, two-time author. So I'm keen to explore that a little bit, of course. Uh, Consultant and now also founder of your own consulting business, uh, and plus more, no doubt, plus more. I'm sure I've left a
So
lot.
much more, Paul.
So I kind of am really looking forward to the discussion. I'm sure we can go all sorts of different directions, but maybe I'll throw over to you to just share a little bit about your background.
Yeah. So my name is Liza Amlani, and many people know me as the chief merchant, and I'm also the principal of Retail Strategy Group. I was a former merchant for over 2 decades. Merchant, and I also did quite a lot of product development within the private label space. Today at Retail Strategy Group, we partner with global brands, retailers to install materials first operating models, accelerate things like speed to market, and of course, sharpen product decisions across categories from apparel to footwear to luxury. Um, and we even work with, some retail tech platforms, helping them to understand what the better practices are that retailers are onboarding. I am also a retail exec advisor, and I believe we were both at NRF but never saw each other.
Yes,
Yes, that
that's
it
because you were
was it
so
was
busy.
wild. I was. It is my marathon. I was named for the second time the NRF Retail Top Voice. So I was doing a lot of podcasts at NRF as well.
Congratulations. That's
Thank you.
fantastic. What do you think? What were the credentials that led you to get that award?
Well, that's a good question. I think um, with NRF, it's really interesting because they do look at top retail experts across the world and seeing and evaluating the ones that are really making a difference in talking about fashion, retail, and retail technology, and how bringing all those together, how retailers should be looking at efficiencies across product creation. For me, I think that was my spotlight because nobody's really talking about it. And I think that's where I really stood out. Also, being a former merchant in the expert space, we don't see that a lot either, which I think is definitely my competitive edge because I've been in many retailers' shoes.
Yes. And do you think, sorry, just to touch on your background just a little bit, because you wear many hats, I suspect it puts you in a really unique position because whether you're doing research for your book, whether you're working with a variety of different clients, and through the associations you commit time to, you probably get this amazing umbrella view of the industry, which is difficult to get when you're immersed in a brand. Uh, I don't know whether you get most of uh, do you get most of your inspiration from the book and the research, or from the client work, or like what where do you think most of the fresh thinking comes from?
I would say it's really aligned to my observations in my roles that I've had within the industry. And then now having this outside point of view of looking at all cross functions across the retail end to end, which is not very common when you're working in a specific function within retail. So, for example, I was a merchant, I was head of buying, I created private label assortments, but it wasn't a requirement for me to look at what was happening in the sourcing function or in materials, which we talk about in the book, is that it's just not expected from a merchant. But now having this expansive point of view and viewpoint across the retail end to end, I can really see how decisions made at the merchant level, how they impact, let's say, what's happening on the factory floor and at vendors. And I think that ties really nicely to what we found in a recent survey and report that we launched with Lectra, is that overdevelopment was the number one challenge that retail executives highlighted in our survey.
Mhm.
So it really came full circle for me.
I mean, that's a good example where when you talk about the cross-functional, the nature of retail being cross-functional, overdevelopment or overproduction, so many different roles can influence that outcome. And
Oh, 100%. Yes. And I think more than we think, because we're so stuck in the way that we're working today, retail silos was the number two issue that was highlighted in our report. And when we think about the way retailers work today, they are very siloed across their functions. And when you have retail silos that exist, your particular function, they're really only thinking about their own goals versus the entire business's goals. Um, they're looking to meet their own deadlines versus looking at the big picture.
yeah, when for just a little story, 2022, we were thinking a little bit about our company strategy. And part of our strategy, wanted we wanted to do our best to bring together the brands and the retailers with the supplier base. So we thought, how could we do that? When we went to the retailers and brands to talk about it, to your point, what we heard very loudly was their response was, "We would love to do that. However, we have more of a challenge getting our own internal entities to work well together. So getting design to work with buyers, to work with product
Yes.
developers, to work with planning teams, for example. So to that end, we kind of spend the next 3 years working on, we call it target operating model design, and trying to find ways to kind of bring that cross-functional connectivity. But I would suspect that everybody in the industry, you said it was the second most common issue reported, so it's still a big issue today. Do you see any good, I don't know, any good use cases where a company's overcome that, or any of your own personal beliefs on how to overcome that?
One of the concepts that we talk about in the Material Life, which is a book on product creation, process, innovation, is breaking down silos by elevating teams that are generally service providers into partners. And what I mean by that is when we think of the materials team, the sourcing team, they're generally in service to design and even merchandising. So, what happens in a typical concept to market calendar? You have seasonal strategy, then you have a design brief, then you have merchants and planners creating the line plan. Designers will sketch into that line plan, present multiple options for maybe one of the slots of the style. When we look at the process from a standpoint where we're elevating materials, elevating sourcing teams, and really having them in partnership with design, collaborating with teams, we find that the number of excessive and unnecessary overdevelopments around materials reduces significantly. Because materials are in the room, and perhaps instead of starting with a design brief, we start with a materials brief. We talk about all the exciting materials that the materials teams have developed, what is in flux, what is being innovated, what is um, foundational, what we have on hand. We start seeing that the design teams and the merch teams are looking at product creation from a materials first standpoint. That is one way to break down silos and innovate the product creation process, which we go into in the book. And the book really focuses on the core idea of how we create product matters more than what we're creating.
I mean, this is a terrific topic, and is it right in me to use the term fabric forward? So there's some retailers and brands who are fabric forward, which is,
Yes.
yeah, and there's others who are not, right? And it's a very distinct difference. And I think, to use your book's title, it makes a material difference to which one you
Yes.
choose. We I delve into this topic from time to time also. The challenge that I see first and foremost is getting a business to want to shift from not being fabric forward to, or fabric first, to being fabric first. Getting that engagement, I find, is it's it's a it's a difficult momentum to change within an organization. Would you, I mean, to me, it's very big. It nearly needs C-suite engagement to
Mhm.
participate, to kind of instigate the change. Would you agree with that, or do you see there's another way to get, like, to get that change into place?
It has to be a leadership initiative.
Hmm.
If we look at the excessive and unnecessary overdevelopment that happens at the beginning of the process in product creation, it's something that's not typically tracked because what happens is the vendor pays for it, right? If the vendor is paying for it, then why not design however much we want and produce however much we want if we're not paying for it? But that's not accurate. There's always a chargeback that the CFO sees and the finance folks, they always see, but the merchants may not actually see it because it's not looked at as a product creation or an overdevelopment line item. Okay. So that's in itself that needs to be overhauled, right? Where we're actually the vendors, and because vendors are also in many instances in service to the brand, they're not going to say no. There's there's not as much pushback. The challenge in working this way is that leadership may not always know what's happening in the concept to market process. They're not in the weeds, which is fair. But if we start to get leadership involved in understanding what overdevelopment and what these unnecessary developments are causing further down the line, which is we impact time to market, we impact cost of the garment or the product, we impact margins, and of course, we impact profitability, right? So when we talk about it from that stance, that's when we start to see investment in innovating that product creation process. But it has to start with leadership. And brands have to look under the hood, right? How are they actually creating that product?
Hey, I definitely want to explore the book for a little bit later. I thought it would be. I find the NRF an interesting time of the year, and I find that the people are curious and they want to know what's happening at NRF. What was your thoughts on NRF this year? What were the big takeaways?
I had a really good viewpoint of NRF being an NRF retail voice, and I was also a speaker. There was a part of the show called NRF Rev, and it was the first time that NRF has ever done this show because it used to be under the Retail Logistics Association. So with NRF Rev, and it was also in a different location, but it was at the same time as NRF. They just couldn't fit it into Javits because it's it
So
was
big, yeah.
it was huge. Yes.
It was
With
8,000
NRF,
people, I think.
at NRF Javits, there were 41,000
Oh, there's
people.
41,000. There you go. Wow,
Yes.
it's
Yes.
crazy.
It is crazy. So with NRF Rev being in a different location, I think it was really interesting because it was almost like a smaller capsule of the big show. And you were able to not only attend keynotes, but the way that the show was structured was that they had roundtable discussions in between the keynotes and the schedule. So everyone would come up to the roundtables and they would pick a table that they wanted to be part of a discussion. And I led 3 of those roundtable discussions. The focus of NRF Rev is reverse logistics, sustainability, circularity. So you not only have brands and retailers in the room that are very interested in these topics or are already working on solutions, investments around these topics, but there are also nonprofits in the room. There are solutions in the room, of course. What was interesting here to me was that we talked a lot about returns not being just an operations problem, that it truly was a product creation problem if we could get accurate reason codes, if we could understand how to sort product. And I think that this was really fascinating for me because I also sit on the board of Goodwill. So bringing in that circularity strategy as a solution to retailers that are looking to use returns and maybe even, let's go back a little bit, physical sampling waste, things like that, to break down the product creation process and looking at it from a point of view of how do we use everything that we are developing, everything that's being returned in market, and bringing it back into the full price cycle. So there was a lot of great conversations there, and what I took away from it is the real fix is how do we prevent returns in the first place? And it does come back to how do we innovate the way that we're creating that product in the first place so that we can break it down into textile to textile recycling, or we reduce returns altogether because we are creating product closer to market.
Right. Right. I like the closer to market. I mean, that stands out as obvious. Uh, the interestingly, for some reason, this topic's come up a couple of times in the last 2 weeks from different retailers who I've been talking to. And let me know if this is a good example. They've told me in both separate instances that the number one reason that they were getting returns was around fit. So
Hmm.
that's where they're investing a lot of energy. So that would be kind of one of the examples, I'm assuming, that came out of the discussions at the
Yes.
roundtable.
Yeah. Yes. But the challenge, even if it is a fit challenge, we don't have enough details when we're getting the return from the customer to impact how we are updating the pattern, the fit, or even the fabric of the the product that's being returned, because reason codes are either not detailed enough, they're not accurate, or frontline or even distribution centers don't understand how to sort it, or there's I hate to say it, but there's a lot of fraud today in returns, right? So even if we have the correct reason code, the customer may not be returning the right product. So there's a lot of things to fix, uh, just from a returns point of view, but fit is absolutely an issue, and we're going to be talking more about fit because it is so connected to the fabric and the way the garment is constructed. But fit, the process of fit hasn't changed in a long time. Fit blocks, patterns, the way
Mhm.
that we grade, sizing, that sort of thing.
And if you had kind of a magic wand, what kind of data would you be getting?
Well, I think it depends on the category, but if we're just talking about, let's say, women's wear or even menswear fashion, if we could get reason codes that are aligned to how a garment fits. If one example is one of the clients that I had a few years ago is that they kept getting returns of a men's pant that was actually one of their best sellers seasons before, but they kept getting returns and they could not figure out why because they didn't have the right reason code in there. And the issue was only determined when the merch team went to the sales floor and they talked to the customers and they said the pockets weren't deep enough. So that's a very specific reason why a product was returned. So I think it depends on the category, right? We also can't have too many reason codes because we won't be able to take action on them. But when we think about the category, we can determine, okay, what makes sense for that category from a reason code. And I think we need to get specific, but not enough. We don't want to overwhelm the customer or, any frontline staff either. Or, yeah,
Yeah.
I would say get specific, but it has to be category specific.
Do you know this topic? I find this topic's coming up more and more. So if I went back 3 or 4 years ago, our firm wouldn't be asked about that topic. Because it's always been important. No doubt, it's always been important, but it's always a case of where your priorities lie and what you want to fix. It never seemed to make it. It never seemed to be so high a priority that they'd come to a consulting firm to help out. But I'm finding it's popping up more and more frequently. So really, it kind of surprises me that it seems to be becoming um, quite impactful to the P&L. I guess that's why people naturally returns since
Yeah.
the explosion of e-commerce become a big thing. I think it stands out to me as a good problem for some clever AI startup to delve into, I think.
The challenge with that, and here's where I bring in this concept of balancing tech and touch, is that yes, it would be great to have an AI solution solve for some of this. Maybe the solution could help identify what those reason codes should be. Maybe it can help validate from a VR or AR perspective, or even using agents to determine what is the most common reason code and then validating the reason code with maybe an image of the garment, right? Of the return. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for technology, but you still need that human touch to make sure that the the technology understands what the current process is. So one of the things as a merchant, what I would do is I would be involved in proto review before the product goes into production, right? We have proto review as a key moment for merchants, designers. That's where we fit the garment. When we're fitting the garment, and this is extremely common, is that we would use the same fit model season after season because that is our typical size 8, right? Let's say, or size 6, size 8, whichever one we decided to use. If the garment fits the fit model in a certain way, and fit models are tall, they're not your typical customer, right? I think this is where we start this rigidness of the fit process, is we're looking at our customer and we're fitting that customer into a certain size of fit model, which is not reality. And I think that's where we go wrong. I think we also go wrong in a sense where when we're building the line plan, we're not necessarily thinking about fit intent. How do we want the garment to fit? And then creating the size scale and the size blocks, matching them up to the fit intent. All size blocks are the same, pretty much the same, unless you have invested time in understanding what is your fit intent. Now we see this more like in denim. I think denim actually is a leader in the fit intent space because we have so many different types of denim, right? And now we have even more, right? Or even we're going back to the 90s, right? With the flares and and the wide legs. So I think that bringing fit intent into the start of the product creation process will help build better fit blocks, have fit models maybe we invest more in fit models and understanding, okay, who is actually our customer? What is the most common size that we sell? And let's get a fit model that matches that size because that would make sense to me. Right.
Yeah.
And you would get less returns because fit is such a challenge for many customers and they're buying more than one size at a time. We know this is happening. How do we remove those barriers for the customer? Well, let's understand the customer better and fit accordingly.
Yeah, and I'll ask you a question I don't know a lot that much about, but on the tech front, I do see from a distance a lot of tech going into body scanning,
Hmm.
the use of 3D design tools, digital avatars of person. Recently, I saw something from Zara where you can even show the product on your own image. Um,
Hmm.
so there seems to be so much happening around how things fit. But it, the question is always, can you apply these tools at a scale? Rather than fringe
Yes.
cases, can you do it at scale? Are you seeing any of these change businesses remarkably, or is there some good stories where it's fixing some of these problems that you refer to?
I haven't actually, because a lot of these solutions are for the customer to use so that they can fit their body shape into the size that's already been developed by the brand. What we need to do is take those insights, right? And also, not all customers are using these size solutions, but if we can take those insights and bring them back into the product creation process and then invest in the technology, here, technology would be great. Like, let's have technology assess and investigate for us what is the most common body shape that matches the size that we are creating, and how do we adjust our fit blocks to match what the customer is actually buying and what they actually want from us, what they're keeping, what they're not returning. And I think that's a really great way to update how we're thinking about fit and size. But again, this is all about innovating that product creation process. And it's not just about calendar and where we're fitting. It is about fit intent, understanding garment construction, which most of us understand that, but we're not taking materials into consideration all the time. Only when it's really, I would say, loud and clear. Like if we're using a traditional fabric like a silk and cut on bias, okay, yes, we understand what the fit could be. Um, if a fabric is high stretch, yes, we understand what it means for fit. But many brands have challenges around this because, for example, the merchant may be involved in product development decisions just like the designer, but they're not actually visiting the factory floor. They're not seeing how is the material being tested because the material, of course, needs to be tested and there's rigorous testing around materials. But once it's constructed and on garment, I think there's a lot of shortcuts being taken.
Yeah, and what you bring to my attention too is something you talked about earlier, which is that cross-functional nature of running a business. And I think as you're talking through the examples, you really touched on 5 or 6 different functions.
Hmm.
Yeah, the orchestration. It seems you could really rethink the orchestration and get a really remarkably positive outcome. But hey, it's
Yes.
probably a great segue to your book too. I know we touched on it a little bit, but maybe did you want to tell us a little bit about the book?
Yeah. So our latest book is called The Material Life: Process Innovation for Retailers and Brands. And it does focus on the product creation process as a whole. How do we how do we work better internally and externally with partners versus service providers? So thinking about the how teams are set up, reducing silos. I mean, we talk a lot about how brands can work differently, and I think that's what makes this book different than anything that I've ever seen out there. Um, for example, I talked a little bit about merchants not being like they don't need to go to factories, right? So when I was at Ralph Lauren, right, I would often change a fabric or a print or a color later in the product creation process, like at assortment, like maybe even after assortment lock, right? Because the customer is telling me that they don't like this and I have bought into this and I need to change it, right? Valid reasons.
Hmm.
And what I've observed is that most merchants work the same way. In my experience, I have seen that merchants are not necessarily involved in the development decisions, like this is a design function. So when changes are made by merchants like me, we don't realize the extent of the consequences of those decisions. Material changes lead to XYZ. Design and development of a new material takes this amount of time. We need to negotiate with the vendor, capacity, timing. We still need to make, delivery deadlines. So I think that's really eye-opening. And the Material Life book talks about this, as well as, you know, what teams need to be exposed to the product development process. And I think merchants are absolutely one of those things. Same as design. I think design, when we start implementing guardrails around the product creation process and implementing, tracking tools around overdevelopment and understanding what is in the material library, how to set up material library. Like we talk about all of that and we talk about how to do that. So this book is very, very informative. Um, and I think brands could learn a lot from the book.
If there was one or two things, just one or two things that if someone was to read the book, one thing they would the easiest thing they could take away, perhaps, what would be one example from coming out of the book?
That's difficult, but I will say that, taking it back to overdevelopment, what we talked about earlier in the discussion, is that the market has already expressed that materials are a foundation and they're a franchise. Like look at Lululemon, Viore, Uniqlo, right? And because fabric can be a franchise, we need to look at materials in a different light. And we should be starting the concept to market process, the product creation process with materials first. And I think when we start looking at overdevelopment and what's happening in materials versus product, so product we know generally is tracked, right? After assortment lock, okay, we made 100 products, we're going to market with 60, we know our overdevelopment rate, right? But if we look at it from a materials standpoint, that's when we're going to start to see, oh, this is how much time, resources, money is wasted on overdevelopment of many materials that maybe already exist. So I think starting with looking at how much you are overdeveloping from a material standpoint, and then simplifying the product creation calendar and bringing this materials first strategy into the way you're creating product. I'd say that is a great place to start.
Hey, let me cite an example. I'd love to get your perspective.
Sure.
I hope I'm on point with the book. Correct me if I'm not. But you do make me think about footwear, right? And the reason I think
Okay.
about footwear is the amount of investment they put into the materials when it comes to footwear. I had a friend recently apply for a role in their product development team, and they were looking for chemists, and
Mm,
they were looking for scientists, and it really stood out how invested they are in getting the material right in footwear. And
yes.
I don't imagine I'm not saying that it needs to be the same for apparel, but surely that there's something to learn for how the footwear industry compete. It, and I've been trying to draw that parallel. Why don't in when it comes to garments, why don't people think I shouldn't say that because some people do, but perhaps why is it difficult to increase that kind of scientific thinking when it comes to
Yeah.
y-
It's funny you mention this because I've noticed a similar thing. The difference between footwear and apparel, I'd say there's two major differences. One is that it takes so much longer to create footwear versus apparel. You're looking at 90 to 100 weeks versus 52 weeks for apparel. Footwear creation is a lot more complex than apparel, also. And I say that because when you think of the components and what is needed, like the lasts, for example, in footwear, like it's a huge investment for brands. So getting the foundation of the footwear style is critical because it is so expensive. It requires such a big investment. And then the textile in the footwear, so the most likely the upper, it needs to be innovated because it requires performance metrics to be met before going to market. So there's a lot more testing involved as well, and a lot more innovation. And if you look at any brand out there, you'll see that the way that how innovative that material is directly related to the performance of that product. That's why you'll see a lot more investment in innovation in footwear versus apparel. And it's also, they're able to scale in footwear versus apparel. And now these are obviously very general
Mhm.
observations, but that is, I would say, a great overview of why there's a lot more investment in innovation and materials in footwear versus apparel. Now, the thing with apparel also is that because the cost of creating apparel is so much lower than footwear, you're going to see a lot more SKUs. You're also going to see a lot more products developed. When we look at earnings calls from footwear brands versus apparel brands, you're going to see a lot more excess inventory and inventory management challenges in apparel than you would in footwear. There's so many more SKUs in apparel, right? And that's why I think tackling overdevelopment in apparel will directly have positive outcomes of increasing profitability, reducing excess, and really solving this time to market challenge that we have. When brands are looking at their product creation calendar and they think they're innovating their process, they're actually just bloating their calendar even more and they're adding more time to market. What we need to do is the opposite. We need to simplify, we need to innovate the process, and we need to think of methodologies of how to frame this material first mindset. Because if you this is another example, now I'm definitely digressing, but this is one of the inspirations for the book was the time I spent leading a materials work stream at a large brand in Beaverton. And what I saw was mind-blowing. The amount of waste in new design and development of materials that already existed in a materials library. That time wasted impacts time to market. It impacts the cost of your product. Full stop.
Yeah, I love your passion for this topic too, and
You can see it.
I can
I could
see
talk
it.
to you about this for hours. But the material life really does capture a lot of this. And we talk about not only that product creation process and how to innovate it and lift teams up and reduce overdevelopment, but we also talk about what are different ways to plan the assortment, implementing multi-track calendars because not all product is equal. So why should it be created in the same way using the same linear calendar? Doesn't make sense, right?
Yeah,
You're right. I could go on and on.
you could. No, but and I'm with you too because I mean I have my own philosophy on materials, which is it's approximately 60% of the product cost. It's the source of where most of the carbon comes from within our industry.
Yes.
It's the way that you can unlock speed because you need to if you want to unlock speed, you got to pre-position the
Mm-hmm.
material. And we spent a lot of time talking about quality as well, right? So whether it's the P&L or the environment, fabric seems to be a significant lever. And for some reason, it's the stone last turned. And I kind of
It
think,
is.
I kind of, I kind of get it in a sense that uh, you kind of got to get your own house in order first, right? Like you want to get your ways of working internally sorted out, and probably intuitively you want to work with your tier ones productively next, and then move to raw materials, then move to fibers, and but if you think about it purely commercially and purely from the environment perspective, it has more, arguably has quite a significant sway, maybe more so perhaps. So I'm
Hmm.
kind of, I share your passion. So I really want to,
Yeah.
it's a good news for any retailer or brand and for any supplier because uh, it is a rock that hasn't been turned as much as others. And I think as a consequence, you can
Yeah.
unlock a lot of value. Yeah.
Yeah. And it's such an underrated trigger to improve your supply chain process.
Yes.
Um, and I want to just mention one more thing around planning the assortment. I did talk about choosing materials at the start of line plan. When we think about the assortment and if we start to implement different tracks when we're creating our product, we can very easily look at seasonless as a track, creating that entire track digitally, right, with digital materials. We even talk about how to create a material library, digital material library in the book, by the way. Very, very easily. And the investment is not as big as I think people would think. So thinking about seasonal as a track, then looking at fashion, your seasonal track as another track, and then looking at fast track to create products that are more reactive, closer to market, capsules, like all of these lanes in the assortment can be created at different times. And I think that's another big unlock. That would be the second unlock, is looking at the assortment and how we're planning it and incorporating different tracks in the calendar by product type.
Hey, I have such a long list of questions for you, and I could just sit on this topic for a while, but there's so many more questions, and I know we don't have that much time. So maybe I will just kind of as a closing question, was there anything we didn't talk about that you really wish we spent a little bit of time on?
I think that we covered a lot.
I think we did too.
Um, yes. And if anyone listening can take away one thing is really look under the hood. How are you creating product today? Is your calendar bloated with tasks? Are your product creation teams and the culture of your teams, are they collaborative culture? And are silos a problem? Because the material life and the way that you think about investing in the product creation process is going to unlock a lot of these challenges that you already have. We know how retailers and brands work, and this is very, very common.
Hey, I think so. A big thanks for your time, and I think you're doing something really wonderful, not only with the book, but with all of your other pursuits and your participation in the industry in general. So, and I think you're really onto a topic that's just, I think, going to consume more and more of people's time, which is focusing on the material side of things. And I think you pointed out in it's not an easy task, right? It takes some focus, takes some efforts, but the rewards are worth the effort. So thanks so much. I really appreciate you taking the time, and certainly sharing your insights will be valued by many. So thank you for that. And we should do it
Thank
again
you.
because we only got halfway through my list. So
We'll definitely, yes, we definitely have to do it again. I would encourage your listeners to sign up for the Merchant Life newsletter. We go live every Monday, and we talk a lot about what's happening in the industry today, a lot of references to the book and how we tie it to social proof on what's happening in the industry right now. And if you are looking to purchase the Material Life or our first book, The Wholesale, you can find it on Amazon or you can contact us directly. I post a lot on LinkedIn, so definitely follow me. And I look forward to round two, Paul.
yes, yes, me too, me too. And I wish you all the best with your pursuits. And I'm keen to hear what comes next. So looking forward to next time or seeing you at NRF, one of the two. And
One of the two.
yeah, thanks again. And I'm looking forward to doing next week's. Stay tuned for next week's podcast, one coming out every single week. So it's a fun journey so far.